everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee. It is April 30th, the last day of April here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to do a little bit more of talk around the NFL draft, not only this year, but the following year. We'll get into what the outlook for 2025 is there. But then at the end of the show, we will get into a little bit of a Top 10 Tuesday and some news around the college football the college football 25 game. Definitely some interesting things going on there with the cover athletes and everything. Wanted to break down 10 guys that I think might have the inside track to get those. Now, there are tons of guys to choose from, but I have 10 here that kind of fit the criteria that they had laid out. But we will get to that a little bit later in the show. But I do want to start here, or before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, you can ask something that you're wondering about, you can call me out for something that I got wrong or I didn't say in one of my segments or whatever you want to relay to me. You can use the tip and donation link, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a little bit more of a fun, interactive experience here, and we get to kind of get to know each other a little bit. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about something that has been a big topic of conversation over the last couple of years, and really since recruiting rankings have been introduced into the world, which is the old debate of do stars matter, do stars not matter, and there are plenty of arguments where there have been incredible athletes that have come out that have been a little bit lower star and have been remarkably successful at the NFL level. But the vast majority of the Stars Don't Matter group are going to not love this segment because, to be totally honest with you, they got it right again. And they've gotten it right in the NFL draft for quite some time now. But we got some numbers to break down for you guys about just how right they got it and just how big of a gap some of these things are. So first, let's get to this and let's talk about the first round, how it kind of shook out in terms of star ranking. So we had 7 5-stars taken in the first round. We had 15 4-stars. We had 9 3-stars and 1 unranked player. That unranked player was Jared Verse, so huge shout out to him for making it all the way from University of Albany to a top 20 draft pick. Just insane, but he is the one outlier there. Now, just to give you a little bit of context of what a 5-star means, what a 4-star means, what a 3-star means. So 5 stars, every single year, they'll break it down from 1 to 32, and those are the 5 stars for that class. And essentially what that means is those are NFL first-rounders, whether that's you're projecting a guy to take some steps forward, like one of the ones that had gotten people very angry a couple of cycles ago was Arch Manning being a 5-star, having played, 2A ball in Louisiana. That's a lot of projection into who he can be, and he's slowly becoming that player, right? So some of it is projection, some of it is just this kid is insane and will absolutely be a first-round draft pick. Now, 4 stars is much bigger group, right? There's roughly from number 33 to 350, kind of a loose 350 there. These are kids that should get drafted. These are kids that can find their way into the draft. Now, there's obviously a little bit of a toss-up there, but definitely guys that are very talented, usually play at Power 5 schools. Some go Group of 5, but the majority go Power 5 and should be drafted in the future. And then 3 stars, there's no specific range. It's kind of you're good enough to play at the next level, play Power 5 or Group of 5 ball, depending on what your ranking is within those 3 stars. But not necessarily a huge expectation for them to go to the NFL. But it shows just how many 7 5-stars out of 32. I mean, they're likely more eligible this year given the COVID year and everything like that. But still, just to kind of contextualize this a little bit more, I was watching Josh Pate's show on Sunday, and he had these type of stats. He was going through this type of trend that has formed over the last couple of years, and he was breaking down something that Preston Guy, the 247 sports guy over at LSU, had broken down. And essentially it is, if you are a 5-star recruit, you are 9 times more likely to be drafted in the first round than if you were a 4-star recruit. If you're a 5-star recruit, you are 85% more likely to be drafted in the first round than a 3-star recruit. So it gives you an idea of how all of this, recruiting craziness that we, look at kids and we say that kid's not a 5-star, or that kid who's a 3-star, it deserves to be a 5-star, or whatever it is. These guys get it right 9 times out of 10. It's really remarkable what they're able to pull off, given that these are only 17, 18-year-old kids, and you have to be able to evaluate them, 4 years or even 10 years in the future in some of these circumstances. But that stat that I just read you is absolutely the magnum opus when you talk about the recruiting world. I think they absolutely love to hear that all of their star rankings tend to be mostly correct. You obviously have some misses where you have some 5-star guys that fell a little bit further. I mean, Spencer Rattler was one of the top players in the entire country when he came out. He dropped to the 5th round. He definitely still got drafted and deserved to get drafted, but it shows you just, there's a variability here for sure. But it's pretty remarkable the amount of the hit rate that they have gotten. I mean, two of those 7 5-stars that were taken were 2 of the top 3 guys in the entire draft when you talk about Caleb Williams and Drake May. So it's pretty remarkable what they're capable of doing, and it's pretty remarkable just in general how they've been able to kind of transform the way that recruiting rankings can be looked at. Because now you can look at them and not say, okay, well, that guy's a 5-star, but who really knows? You can pretty much look at the data and say there's a very good chance, or at least a much better chance, that this kid is going to go into the NFL draft and have a successful career for us than the 4-star that is a little bit below him, or even the 3-star that is further below them. So tons to take away from this, obviously. I think the main thing to take away is Jared Verse is an absolute beast and did incredible things throughout his college career, so huge shout out to him. But before I go any further with this, I do want to say I fully understand that this is not the end-all be-all. There is no reality where kids are just getting drafted based off their, 5-star name next to their, or the 5-star next to their name on a recruiting service. That doesn't happen. I promise you that doesn't happen. But what I will say is there are certain things within recruiting and within even development or even scouting when you go to the NFL level that are just impossible to quantify. They're impossible to get an idea of what's going on from the neck up, right? That's always the biggest denominator with pretty much every single sport, whether a guy is going to be successful or not. It has a lot to do with what's going on upstairs, day-to-day basis. How did this guy handle certain things? Some of these guys have gone through incredible amounts of hurdles and struggles and injuries to get to where they are, and you don't really know how a guy's going to handle that, especially when they're 17 or 18 years old. So there is obviously going to be a huge toss-up. Michael Penix Jr. was the first non-blue chip recruit taken, and blue chip just means a 5 or 4-star in the class. And he is the epitome of a guy that has overcome a ton of stuff and is wired right from the neck up. I mean, overcoming 2 ACL tears, going to a new school, being the player that he was, and getting drafted 8th overall. I think it's just incredible to see what he was able to pull off throughout his time in his college career to come from that 3-star point to an 8th overall pick. Oh, let me check this out here. Oh, yes. If you wanted to look into the internship program, I know they have some applications out right now. I know there have been a ton of people that have applied already, so you might have a little bit of trouble, but if you want to look up the internship program here, you're more than welcome to throw your hat into the ring. It just seems like, as of right now, I don't think there's anyone to directly reach out to, so apologies for not being able to get it as clean as you might have liked it, but if you look up the internship program, there's definitely a way for you to at least apply and go through the process and hopefully join us over here. But appreciate the comments as always, and hopefully that was helpful for you. But let's get back to Michael Penix and these different guys that kind of change up the way that we think about this. I think one of the big things that we talk about with college football a lot, and really just football in general, I think is a very, very great example of a sport where a lot of what's going on, a lot of what makes a guy succeed is what's going on upstairs, right? And I think obviously athletic ability plays a huge part in the way that these guys go about drafting these players. But when you look at a kid that, you have to go out on the field every single day and put your body on the line, you have to go full speed at other guys and then pop right back up and be willing to play the next play. You have to go through injuries. You have to go through tons of stuff on and off the field that are going to take big time tolls on your mental health, on your physical health, on just you in general. And I think there's a lot of that stuff that is impossible to quantify, at least from evaluating a kid from high school. And I think it's one of those things that makes this NFL draft so much fun, where you have some guys that have made their way up from being a 3-star to become a first-round draft pick and then hopefully become an absolute, NFL legend. I mean, Aaron Donald was a 3-star coming out of high school. He became one of the best players that I've ever seen play football. So it's one of those things that there is going to be a little bit of variability to this. There is going to be a little bit of throwing things at the wall and hoping things stick to a certain extent, just because you can't look inside a guy's head and you can't know what he's going to react to when maybe it's a kid that has been living in the same state or the same city as his entire life, and now you're having to move out to LA and you don't know how he's going to handle that. You don't know if maybe he has a girlfriend that's still in school and he was there for her the last couple of years, and now he has to move away from her and they have to be apart. You don't know what's going on outside of the football realm, but it's pretty remarkable when you look at these recruiting rankings how they've been able to not only deduce how physically capable these kids are, because that's already a incredibly hard job just because of the different styles of play and the different ways that especially quarterbacks or wide receivers or whatever go about their business on the field. But from a mental perspective, you can't get it all, but there are certain guys that stand out, and you'll find them slowly throughout these different classes, guys that just kind of carry themselves a little differently. So I'm sure this plays somewhat of a part. A guy like I've talked about a couple of times on this show, Ryan Puglisi, who it feels like every time you hear his name, it's all about how professional he is, all about how he plays the game like an absolute NFL pro right now. And I think those are the things that jump out, obviously, but there's also a million different things that literally cannot jump out. So while, recruiting rankings are something that a lot of people like to get mad at and a lot of people like to scoff at a little bit, I promise you they're doing a very, very good job. They have never been more accurate than they are now. It's just remarkable the work that the people at On3 and the people at 247 and every other site, really, Rivals, ESPN, I'll be honest, has been slacking a little bit lately, but I'll let Shannon Terry handle that one on Twitter. But I think there's been a ton of stuff going on around the college football world and around the recruiting world that has changed the way that these kids are wired, and it's changed the way that you can understand a kid, especially on the inside and especially what's going on in his brain, because there's a ton of different stuff thrown at him and you don't know how they're going to handle it. But it's just insanity to me that they're able to pluck these kids out of air. And obviously some of these kids jump off the page when you talk about a Trevor Lawrence or a Caleb Williams or even someone like Quinn Ewers, who has just, when you were watching those tapes when he was in junior year of high school or whatever, the ball just explodes out of their hands. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of unknown, and the ability for them to kind of take the known with the unknown and find a really remarkable amount of hit rate when it comes to saying this guy's going to be a first-round starter when he's 17 years old, and then he ends up being one when he's 22, is just, it's something that really is just one of the more remarkable things in the world. So while I understand the stars don't matter thing do apply to some people, I really hope it applies to Jared Verse, who can have a remarkable career after overcoming a ton throughout his college career. I hope that, all these kids that are able to get to the next level, even though being a lower star recruit, succeed and, continue that great tradition of sometimes stars don't matter, but man, they're getting it right a lot. I'll be honest with you. So if you get a 5-star, if you get a guy that is towards the top of his class, it's not a sure thing by any means, but I would feel pretty confident. I would feel pretty good about that if I was you. So recruiting rankings win again. On3 and 247 continue to win throughout the NFL draft cycle, but it'll be interesting to watch this throughout the next couple of years. I assume that it'll only get better for these recruiting services, but who knows? Maybe some different things happen that make this a little bit harder, but as of right now, those places are absolutely cooking. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the NFL draft quarterback situations, break down the guys that were taken in the first round because those are the likely ones to start at least as soon as possible. And then we'll get to kind of the later round guys, just kind of little tidbits on them and how I think they fit into their new organizations. But we will break that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a little bit of the NFL draft, breaking down some of the recruiting rankings and how they kind of tied into the NFL draft and how the recruiting rankings are doing pretty well of predicting what's going to happen in the NFL draft. The 5-stars being the first rounders really is working out for them as of right now. But let's get into some quarterback situations. We had tons of guys go in the first round of the NFL draft, 6 guys. We had 11 overall taken in the draft, but let's start with the 6 first-round guys, and if we got some time, we can break down briefly the guys that were taken a little bit later. But let's start with Caleb Williams, the guy that everyone is talking about that has created a new hand signal for the Bears, it seems. But at the end of the day, this is a guy that is coming into the league with about as much eyes on him as anyone I can remember. And it partly is because, being the number 1 pick that comes with the territory, right? But also, it's who he is. He has a lot of different ers and ahs to his personality that some people don't love, some people like. It'll make him a very, very interesting quarterback to watch. But let's talk about some of the tangible aspects that I think makes this a really awesome situation for him, to be totally honest with you. The 3 receivers that he has is an embarrassment of riches. When you talk about Keenan Allen, you talk about one of the most professional route runners in the entire NFL, a guy that rarely makes any drops, a guy that can absolutely be a great third down piece for him, along with Cole Kmet, who is a fantastic tight end that is only getting better throughout his years. I think they're set up there with 2 guys that you can count on day in, day out, will not have to worry about a ton of drops, will not have to worry about them getting, mad about targets or anything like that. You can actually just sink your teeth into those 2, let those 2 be your crutch, and then you have DJ Moore and Rome Odunze to have a little bit of fun. DJ Moore obviously can get down the field as a huge deep threat, and I think that's something that they're absolutely going to use Caleb Williams for. He's someone that can extend plays, that can absolutely launch a ball off pretty much any platform. So having someone like DJ Moore will unlock Caleb Williams a little bit more, and you'd be shocked how easily it can be for this guy to get that confidence and flip that switch. Sometimes it's just one deep ball that goes perfectly into the pocket of DJ Moore for a touchdown, and this kid's rolling. So I think that's a huge pickup for them. And then you talk about Rome Odunze, who is someone that I think if you could have paired a young receiver with an old receiver, you would have done you would have been up hours trying to figure out a better duo than Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen. I think they fit together very, very well. Now, Rome Odunze has a little bit more of that stretch the field mentality than Keenan Allen does, but when you talk about route running, when you talk about the incredible hands, when you talk about just the professionalism on the football field, both of those guys are as good as it gets in the NFL. So I think while Rome Odunze, I think, is ready to contribute right away, I think he'll only get better throughout the season. And then once Keenan Allen's career comes to an end, he's going to be right ready to take over that role and be a huge piece for them. So really love that pick. I think it's something that you just needed to surround him with as many pieces as possible. And then you talk about the running game, brought in DeAndre Swift from the Eagles. I don't know why I blanked on where he was. Brought him from the Eagles. They have Khalil Herbert on the team. I think this is a solid running game. You know, you don't necessarily have that big name that is going to be your down in, down out back, but you do have DeAndre Swift, who will likely be the 25s between 25 back, 25-yard line between 25-yard line, and then Khalil Herbert, the other 25, to kind of finish off drives, be that short yardage guy whenever you need him. And DeAndre Swift helps him out a ton when it comes to the passing game because he's great in screens. He's great just getting open, getting his hands on the ball, and then finding his way downfield any which way. So I think that's a great pickup there. O-line is only getting better. Now there still are some steps that need to be taken. Now you do have Caleb Williams, which makes that look a little bit better than it probably would normally, but the O-line is going to be solid, I think, for years to come. When you have guys like Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright on both sides of your line, you got to feel pretty good about the future. Those guys are only going to keep getting better and only going to keep getting more comfortable in this league. And especially having someone like Caleb where if you do make a mistake, he might be able to bail you out is not the worst thing in the world by any means. And then finally, the offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, I think is a fantastic fit for Caleb Williams. There are certain things with Caleb Williams that you would just love to see him do a little bit more of, with just staying in the pocket a little bit longer, being more confident, mobilizing in that pocket and not bailing as quickly as he does, being able to really push the ball downfield, which was something that Shane Waldron really, really excelled at with Geno Smith a year ago. So I think bringing over a lot of those philosophies, not only in play calling, but also in the way that he coaches up Williams, will make him the player that he's capable of being. Because I think Caleb Williams is fantastic and he can make incredible plays outside of the pocket, but at the end of the day, you want your quarterback to be making most of his plays inside the pocket just to make sure that he is as safe as possible, and I think taking those strides will be absolutely huge. Now, the big question mark here, and the one that is a little bit less tangible but absolutely will be there, is if the first 3 games, the first 4 games, whatever you want to call it, if he starts a little bit slow, it could get ugly pretty quickly. I'll be totally honest with you. And not necessarily in the sense that he will continually roll down this hill and be a terrible player by any means, but the Chicago fans will start to get worried. And there will be certain Chicago fans that already, are a little bit on the fence about him that will be very aggressive and will definitely put this guy under a big-time spotlight, and he'll have to respond. And it's part of the game, right? It's part of being the savior for a franchise. When you walk in the door, a lot of people are expecting a lot from you, and if you don't deliver, you're going to hear about it. So we'll learn a lot about Caleb Williams, not only as a football player and how he's able to, patch some of the holes in his game, but also just as a person, how he's able to handle all the scrutiny that will come his way if he just throws one pick. So it'll be really interesting to see all this unfold. I think Caleb Williams is going to be a great quarterback. I think he has a much better head on his shoulder than people give him credit for. Now, do I know he's going to succeed? No, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of things are in place for him to be the guy that he's definitely capable of being. So it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold, and I think this is a situation where Caleb Williams got to be pretty happy considering all the other situations that Bears quarterbacks have walked into. But let's move on down the list to Jaden Daniels. This is a little tougher one to peg down, partly because of all the movement that's going on with the Commanders organization and a lot of the different things that are happening around there. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of the things play into Jaden Daniels' hands, and some of it will require him to be the athletic beast that he is, but they've made some strides. I think the O-line got a great upgrade this year, which was absolutely necessary with someone that is a little bit undersized, likes to get himself hit probably a little bit too much, and they'll definitely have a conversation about that, but adding Biotish, adding Nick Allegretti, I think is two great guys on the interior of that line. Still definitely need to build out that line much more. Don't necessarily have tons of guys that you feel super confident in, but having someone that can extend plays and be dynamic with his feet definitely helps that a little bit. And then you got to start patching holes. And if they don't patch holes by, his second or third year, then we can have a real conversation about this. But you add, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin at the wide receiver role, and then someone like Austin Eckler, who obviously is not necessarily the running back that he used to be, but still a fantastic receiving option out of the backfield, still a guy that can get you tons of yards after the catch, and will be a great kind of bailout option for Jaden Daniels. So I think that was a fantastic pickup for them. You already have Brian Robinson, who I expect to be kind of the down-in, down-out back, but who knows? Maybe Austin Eckler is able to kind of carve out that position as the receiving back and be on the field more often, but having that guy on the field can only really help Jaden Daniels. And then I do love this offensive quarterback fit. I think there was a little bit of worry around Cliff Kingsbury, because of his time in Arizona, but I think he's plenty capable of putting together a really good offense. I just don't think head coaching was necessarily the position he was supposed to be in. So I think he's well equipped to handle the quarterback that Jaden Daniels is because of the athleticism, the dynamic ability. He had guys like Kyler Murray. He's had guys like Caleb Williams a year ago at USC. So I think it just fits into Jaden Daniels, what he's going to be capable of doing early on. And then they'll have to evolve as that time goes on, as the O-line gets a little bit better, as the weapons get a little bit better around him. So I think there's a ton of different things going on around the Washington Commanders right now, but I think there's a huge thing that kind of plays into his favor is this is a totally new era. You have a new coach, a new quarterback, and most importantly, new ownership. You brought in Josh Harris, who is the owner of the 76ers right now, and this essentially just gives you the ability to say, we picked our quarterback, we know who that is, now let's push our chips to the center of the table. Now let's start making moves to not only make us a contender, but make us a Super Bowl player. And it'll be really interesting to see all that develop. Now, the right buttons have to be pushed, obviously. You have to bring in the right guys. You have to do the right things. But at the end of the day, I think this is something that they absolutely can make work as long as, the ownership is willing to push their chips to the center of the table and give Jaden Daniels the necessary pieces to succeed the way that he can. But it's an absolutely more of an uphill battle than it will be for Caleb Williams, but I think he has the ability to reach his lofty ceiling in Washington. I think a lot of the things that are there play into who he is. So we'll watch that unfold and we'll see what happens, but I like that situation maybe a little bit more than some others do. But let's get over to Drake May, and this is the sketchy one. At least right now, this is the very sketchy one. You have the Patriots are not in a great spot on the offensive side of the ball, don't have a ton of proven playmakers at wide receiver or tight end. The O-line is solid, I guess, is the best way to put that, but not necessarily what you want it to be. The beauty of the Drake May situation is, in my opinion, they have time. The consensus opinion that I've seen around the drafts and around these quarterbacks has been Drake May needs to sit a year, and I fully agree with that. I think sitting behind Jacoby Brissett will give him the chance to learn the things that he needs to learn, but not only that, will give the front office of the Patriots the chance to build out the things that they absolutely have to build out, because Drake May is not a quarterback that is going to be able to fully succeed at the next level if not given protection, if not given the receivers that he needs, because we saw it at UNC. The O-line was not great. The wide receivers and the playmakers on the outside were not great at all times, and it created some situations where he went into Superman mode and made some mistakes. So you need to surround this kid with the right situation. He's a remarkably talented kid, and honestly, I think he can be one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL in the future. But at the end of the day, they have to push the right buttons to make that happen. They got Jalen Polk, they got Javon Baker, who I think are two great wide receivers that can help them in the future. They have Austin Hooper and Hunter Henry on the roster at tight end to help him out a little bit as he gets going, but more needs to happen. I don't think there's any question about that. I think this can become an elite situation where you have a new coaching staff, you have a new way of thinking, and they're willing to take some of those risks, but you got to press the right buttons, you got to do the right things, and it's not necessarily the best situation. In fact, I would argue it's one of the worst situations among the rookie quarterbacks, but that's for now. There's plenty of things that can happen between right now and when he touches the field that can make this a much better situation than it is currently. But let's move on to the shocking pick in the most confusing situation, Michael Penix Jr. This came a month or two after you gave over $100 million to a quarterback. Definitely not what Michael Penix wanted, I would say pretty confidently. I think he was expecting to probably go to Las Vegas or go somewhere where he was going to be the starter from the get-go, because he is an older guy and he's likely ready to start. But this is a situation that I think if they can thread the needle, and they really will have to thread the needle with the way that they handle this situation, but if they can, it could be an incredible situation that he's walking into. So the Falcons obviously have a very talented young trio. You talk about Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London. Now Kyle Pitts still has a little bit of work to do when it comes to filling out that lofty expectations when he came in, but has had some injuries, has had some stuff that are a little bit out of his control. I think he'll have a really good year, honestly, with Kirk Cousins at quarterback, but you have Bijan Robinson, you have Tyler Algier, you have an offensive line that at the very least is solid, probably will take some building out a little bit more throughout the next couple of years, but still a good room, and you'll have the run game to go along with the pass game that hopefully comes. And then Penix, in my perspective, is a guy that he can start in the NFL right away. I don't think there's any question about that, but I do think there are a ton of benefits that he can learn from Kirk Cousins over the next 2 years to when he does touch the field, he is the best version of himself. And all of those things are very nuanced things, especially in the NFL. When you talk about reading coverages, I think there have been some zone coverages in the college level that totally confused Michael Penix and forced him to be a little bit inaccurate, getting hit on some plays and then letting that kind of carry over into the next play, and the way that you go about your business has been something that Penix has really struggled with. I think Penix has the ability to have a remarkable career at the NFL level. I just think some of those things need to be patched, and maybe sitting behind Kirk Cousins for 2 years is the exact way to do that. Now, you would be trotting out a 25-year-old to make his very first start in the NFL, but maybe it's a 25-year-old that's ready to roll. Maybe it's a guy, they're not the same situation at all. I've seen people kind of compare them, but they're not. The Jordan Love type idea where you have a guy who's sitting, but then when he gets out there, he's absolutely ready to rock, is something that I think the Falcons are hoping for. They're totally different situations, of course, because they just signed Kirk Cousins, but it's the same principle of, you let a guy work out some of the kinks, and then when he gets on the field, you don't have to work out any of the kinks. You don't have to worry about getting into week 6 and worrying about his ability. So I think this is a situation that has the highest variability. It could go any number of ways. You could have, a weird relationship between him and Kirk Cousins that could get a little bit contentious and hurt kind of the dynamic there. You could have, just the not the right buttons being pressed, whether it's personnel wise or in the locker room or whatever that is for the Falcons. But I do think there is a situation where it can be nearly perfect when you watch it on the field. I think there's a situation where it could be an absolute nightmare. And it'll totally matter what the front office does over the next couple of years. It'll totally matter how him and Kirk Cousins get along. And it'll totally matter how Michael Penix handles the situation. So this is a weird situation. This is one that I don't necessarily envy if I was in Michael Penix's situation, but honestly, if everything goes the way that the Falcons in their head have this going, it could be insanely beautiful the second he touches the field, and this offense could absolutely be soaring in a couple of years. But that's banking on the Falcons making a lot of right decisions. So we'll see what happens there. I have faith in Michael Penix to, do the things that are necessary, but it's going to be interesting to watch. Let's put it that way. But let's move on down to J.J. McCarthy, and I think this is the best situation, at least from the outside looking in. I think when you look at the roster, when you look at the head coach, when you look at some of the infrastructure already there, there's a lot in place for J.J. McCarthy, and it obviously starts with Justin Jefferson, the best wide receiver in the game, has a catch radius that is bigger than anyone that I've ever seen, just absolutely remarkable, makes a lot of not-so-good throws look really good. Then you have Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson to add to that receiving core, so this is about as good of a group as you could possibly hope for if you're J.J. McCarthy, especially someone like J.J. McCarthy who is going to need some time to ramp up the ability to take over a game, to be the passer down in and down out. But having all those guys around him definitely helps that. The O-line is incredibly solid, mainly because of Christian Darrisaw, one of the best left tackles in the entire league. Protecting JJ's blind side definitely makes him feel a lot safer, especially as a smaller quarterback who, given the right hit, could encounter some injuries during his career. Having someone protecting your blind side that is that good is a huge bonus. But then the most important to me is having Kevin O'Connell in your corner. This is a guy that all of his quarterbacks, the best thing about them and the thing that made them so successful was throwing over the middle of the field. And that was always the thing that JJ did incredibly well in college. And it's honestly a little bit surprising, him being a little bit, of a smaller stature. Some of those guys struggled to throw over the middle of the field. This guy did not. He was incredible when it came to navigating the pocket, finding the open window, and then just dialing a ball in there. So it's going to be a huge part of his success at the next level. I think Kevin O'Connell knows that, and I think he's going to drop a lot of stuff whether it's kind of mesh concepts where you have two people coming over the middle of the field, giving him options, or it's posts over the middle of the field, whatever it looks like. I think this offense really does play into the hands of what J.J. McCarthy does the absolute best. So this is a situation that I really, really love. Now, can J.J. McCarthy handle being the guy that has to throw 25, 30 passes a game, has to do some of the things that he wasn't required to do at Michigan because the run game's probably not going to be as strong comparatively to Michigan at the college level. Very few in the NFL are. It's likely that the defense isn't quite as strong as Michigan was comparatively. So there's some more things that are going to be on his shoulders, but if he can take him in stride, this is a situation that this kid could absolutely thrive in and make a lot of people really mad because there's some people that are not the biggest fans by any means. But finally, let's get to Bo Nix, and this one's just weird. I'll be totally honest with you. I think Bo Nix has tons of ability. I think he is a guy that actually, between him and Sean Payton, I think the fit is actually really good, but the team is just not very good. Let's be totally honest with you. There's nothing that really stands out from the running back or wide receiver position. Now, you did add Troy Franklin. Marvin Mims is a guy that I think is going to develop into a fairly good receiver. Javonte Williams is good at the running back position, but has had some injuries that make his future just a little bit uncertain. But I think there's an interesting thing that could happen here, kind of the same thing that could happen in New England with Drake May, where this situation as it sits right now is pretty ugly. I'll be totally honest with you. Now, the O-line is going to be relatively solid. You have Garrett Bowles, you have Mike McGlinchey, you have some guys there, but definitely need to build that out a little bit more. The right buttons need to be pressed, and they need to be pressed fairly quickly, because this is a guy that is going to see the field right away and is going to be thrown into the fire. And while I think Sean Payton has the ability to put him in the right situations and make him as successful as possible, he's going to need more around him. He just has to. We saw what happened at Oregon a year ago. When you're surrounded with all of that talent and all of that in that great offensive scheme that Will Stein was running, in that offensive line that gave him plenty of time, the kid can be incredible. His accuracy is off the charts. That is by far his best attribute, and that's something that Sean Payton has gotten a lot of ability out of in the past. You talk about someone like Drew Brees, who his thing was accuracy. He didn't do a ton of, the remarkable Josh Allen type plays because he didn't have that in his bag, but he was going to hit the guy when he needed to be hit, where he needed to be hit, and it wasn't going to cause a lot of problems for your team. So I think this is something that Bo Nix has the ability to be very successful in this league purely because of his accuracy. Because when you look around the league, a lot of the issues with teams is you have playmakers around the field, you have guys that you can get the ball to, but getting the ball to them is 90% of the battle. So Bo Nix can absolutely execute an offense. He can absolutely put the ball where it needs to be when it needs to be there. Will the guys that he's throwing it to be able to not only catch those passes, but also turn upfield, make some plays, help him out a little bit? Because this is not necessarily a guy that is going to take over an offense by any means. He is a guy that can execute an offense and do it really, really well, but you do have to surround him with the right personnel, with the right offensive line, the right wide receivers, and just give him more to work with. But all that being said, I think this is a kid that a lot of people are, laughing at. A lot of people saw the Auburn highlights and just can't get that out of their head. But he's taken a ton of strides, and I think as long as Denver can hit the right buttons, can get the right guys in place, and Sean Payton can get, the Drew Brees type potential out of this kid, there's an ability there that I think a lot of people might not think is there, which is, in my opinion, making deep playoff runs and being a quarterback that signs a second contract and sticks around in Denver for quite some time. But that's probably the biggest if of the group, probably by far, to be totally honest with you. But that'll do it for those quarterbacks. We'll move on from that. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about next year's draft. The odds for the first overall pick came out. We have a mock draft that came out. So I want to break down kind of what that looks like and some players to watch going into next year. So stick around and we'll be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the QB situations that some quarterbacks were drafted into in the draft this past weekend, but let's get into the 2025 draft. Never too early to look ahead a little bit, but we had a mock draft come out. We've had the odds for the number 1 overall pick come out, so I wanted to get to the number 1 overall pick first, honestly, and I wanted to break down, first of all, what these look like overall, but also... Wait, that's the mock first round. Okay, there we go. Let's get to the odds of the top first pick, and it's led by Shedeur Sanders. And in my eyes, I think the top first pick, at least right now, is a battle between 3 guys, or 3 quarterbacks in particular: Shedeur Sanders, Quinn Ewers, and Carson Beck. I think those are the 3 guys that, given the right season, could find their way into that top pick. Now, I would lean more towards Carson Beck or Quinn Ewers. I've said on here before, I think Carson Beck will be the number 1 overall pick next year just because of the season that I expect him to have. But I think Quinn Ewers is the other guy that has probably a better shot than Shedeur Sanders, partly just because there's going to be more games to be played for Quinn Ewers. I'd be very surprised if Shedeur and Colorado made it into the playoff. I'd be very surprised if... Honestly, there's a very real possibility they might miss a bowl game. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but it won't necessarily be the year where Shedeur is able to put remarkable tape out there and play on the biggest stages and do the things that a lot of the top picks have done in the past. So Quinn Ewers is someone that you expect to get into the playoff with that Texas team this year. You expect to possibly play in the SEC championship in his very first year and just have more games to put good things on tape. So I would lean towards the two guys there at plus 300 more than the guy at plus 100. But at the end of the day, Shedeur Sanders, the talent is off the charts. So if he can put together a remarkable year at Colorado, I think it's definitely on the table. And then you look down this list a little bit more, and you have some wild cards that absolutely could get their name into the situation. When I look at this list, I think there's a number of names that pop out. I think seeing Drew Aller that high is a very interesting thing. But when you look at the measurables, when you look at the arm talent, it's not that crazy to think that given the right year, a team could absolutely fall in love with that kid. Jalen Milroe is the one that I'm really watching, partly because this is a kid that it seems like he's already made a ton of progress throwing the ball, and it feels like he's starting to make those NFL-level throws that were really lacking a year ago, where it was pretty much, is he going to throw it 50 yards down the field, or is he going to dump it off to a running back type of vibe? I think he now has the ability to throw those deep crossers, throw the ones where you're going over a linebacker but under a safety, doing the things that are going to be required of him at the next level. It feels like he's taken a lot of steps forward, and then when you look at the athletic ability, I would totally understand how this guy, given the right year, could make a team be like, that's an entire offense over there. That's a guy that can totally transform our team the second he steps on the field. So while I don't necessarily expect him to be the number one overall pick, that's a guy that definitely has an outside shot and will be playing some big-time football to kind of show off that ability more and more. And then some guys kind of on the outside looking in. Connor Wegman and Noah Fafita are two guys that are really interesting going into this year. Now, I think both of them could probably benefit from maybe staying one more year after this year. Connor Wegman has struggled with some injuries. Noah Fafita just kind of breaking onto the scene at Arizona. So I think those are very much outside shots, but two guys that are very talented and definitely have some ridiculous arm talent. Connor Wegman's a guy that I think, because he's been off the field a little bit and had some injury troubles, people kind of forget just how talented this kid is capable of being. But very, very big fan of him. But then let's get to some other guys. There are tons of other positions in this draft that there's a real possibility that there will not be a quarterback taken number one overall. In fact, the mock draft that I have for you here in a second has a non-quarterback going number one overall. And the edge rushing position is always one that there's a huge premium put on. That's always one that seems to find its way towards the top. You had Trayvon Walker in 2021 taken number one overall at the edge rushing position. So wouldn't be necessarily surprised if that happened again. You have guys like James Pierce Jr., who I think is absolutely leading the pack here. Now, Mykel Williams is the one with the best odds here, but that surprised me a little bit, I'll be honest. Now, Mykel Williams, I expect to have a fantastic year and do just remarkable things for Georgia, but I just think James Pierce Jr. is the more complete guy, the guy that I expect to have the more productive year, maybe not the better year when you actually look at the tape, but I think in terms of number of sacks, number of tackle for losses, I think you'll see more from James Pierce Jr. But then you do have Mykel Williams, who could have a fantastic year. You have Patrick Payton, who could have a remarkable year. Even someone like Abdul Carter, who's just absolutely remarkable, can do so many different things on the defensive side of the ball, I think could be a really, really interesting guy to watch. Another couple of guys that are super dynamic on, both sides of the ball is Travis Hunter, someone that you definitely will be watching towards the top of the draft. Now, I'd be a little bit surprised if he ended up going number one overall, barring some remarkable season in 2024. But this is a guy that definitely has claim to the top 10, maybe even the top 5, because the athletic ability is just off the charts. It's as good as any player that really I've ever seen, to be totally honest with you. Now, I don't think the playing wide receiver and corner thing will translate to the next level. I don't think that an NFL roster and an NFL team would really be open to that, but he's a remarkable corner. Even if he was just a corner, he would be right up here with the top of the draft picks this upcoming year. And then you have someone like Harold Perkins, who I think it really needs to be watched out for. He is so interesting. He is someone that I think was really poorly utilized a year ago at LSU, and can be an absolute game changer. Can be a guy when every time you turn on an LSU game, you keep seeing number 4. You keep seeing number 4, and he's making different plays. It's not just, getting into the backfield and making a sack or making a tackle for loss. He's dropping back into coverage. He's breaking up passes. He's doing just remarkable stuff on the football field, and I think given the new staff that has been brought in there with Blake Baker and Bo Davis and all of the talent that has been brought in there on that staff, I think it just gives Harold Perkins a better leg to stand on, and then you can just soar after that. So Harold Perkins is the guy that I think as of right now probably is a little bit further away from that top pick or that top 5 pick that some people expected him to be even a year ago, but he could absolutely get that back in a hurry just because of the absolute unreal talent of this kid. But finally, there's 2 offensive tackles that I wanted to get into. Will Campbell is the guy that I think is probably the most likely tackle to be taken number 1 overall. Now, the other guy that I'm about to talk about, Kelvin Banks Jr., was taken earlier in the mock draft I'm about to show you, but I think both these guys are remarkably talented. They're as good of tackles as you will have in pretty much any draft. I think they probably would have gone after Joe Alt if they were in this draft, but not too far after. I think they likely would have been 2 and 3 on the board. They're just going into their junior year, so they can't. So both these guys are going to be huge prospects. One could get taken number 1 overall just because, depending on how things fall, some teams might need some offensive tackle help, and both these guys are absolutely ready to play in the NFL. They'd be ready to play in the NFL today, to be totally honest with you. But let's go to the mock draft, and let's see kind of how some of the people see this shaking out. Now, you have James Pierce Jr. up top. I think that is the guy that I would say, if you're a defensive player or if you're any non-quarterback really in this draft to be taken number 1 overall, that's where I'd go if I'm being honest. But then you have Kelvin Banks at 2, fantastic offensive tackle, would definitely be a huge help to Drake May up there. Obviously, this order can go any which way in the next year, but you have guys like Michael Williams jumping up the board. People see that athletic ability, and it really jumps off the page. So I think it's someone that will definitely get a lot of hype throughout the year, and I expect a huge year from him. So I would not be surprised if he found his way to a Trayvon Walker type year where he just shoots up draft boards. You had Shadur Sanders going number 1 of the quarterbacks, going to the Titans, which would be a very interesting pick there. Got to make sure that Dion signs off, of course, but we'll see what happens. I feel like I've seen Quinn Ewers to the Raiders or the Seahawks in pretty much every single mock draft that I've seen, so definitely watching for that one. Carson Beck is going to be right after him. There's just so many good guys in this class. You have Cam Ward at 10 to the Saints is a very interesting one, a guy that can definitely play himself into a big-time payday at the end of the year. Abdul Carter is a guy that I'm watching very closely throughout this year because, frankly, I think he's the best player, one of the best players in the entire country, and could leave the year being the best player in the entire country. Luther Burden was the number 1 wide receiver taken off the board. I think that's kind of a no-brainer now. Tatoria McMillan will have plenty to say about that, but Luther Burden's just off the charts good and someone that can absolutely transform a franchise very quickly. You have Mason Graham and Walter Nolan here, 2 defensive tackles that are going to be absolutely huge at the next level. Will Johnson going a little bit later in the first round, but a fantastic guy that absolutely will make a difference here. Princely Umanmielen going at 22. The Falcons is a very interesting one. Transferring, didn't necessarily hit the full stride at Florida, but has a huge chance ahead of him, and definitely I think will have a huge year, especially with Walter Nolan right next to him. Jalen Milroe going in the first round. Talik Williams is a fantastic piece for Ohio State this year. You have other guys down the list. You have Evan Stewart, who just made his way to Oregon. You have Isaiah Bond, who just made his way to Texas on here. Shamar Stewart is definitely a guy to watch throughout this process. Emory Jones, the offensive tackles over at LSU are just off the charts good. And Tyler Booker might be my favorite guy in this upcoming year just because he's an absolute force on the inside and will make guys just straight up quit. So this is going to be a really fun year to watch, a really fun draft to watch. Obviously, we are well away from any of this being set in stone. But at the end of the day, there is so much talent across pretty much every position in the next year's draft of that top end talent. It feels like it's across the board. You have the quarterbacks, the three up top, I think are going to be just incredible prospects once we get to that day, although there are some people that are a little bit more skeptical. You have Luther Burden and Tatori McMillan at wide receiver. You have James Pierce Jr. and Mykel Williams at edge rusher. It just feels like there's so much talent in this class at every single position, so it's going to be really fun to watch to see how this unfolds. Obviously, there's tons to still be said for a lot of these players, but some, pop up in the last year. You have Jaden Daniels, who got very little talk, and then burst onto the scene. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if some guys find their way up that board. But for the time being, I think it seems like it's Shedeur Sanders, Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers are the guys that really are battling for that top spot if it does end up going quarterback. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we have a Top 10 Tuesday for you guys. And I'm going to give you my top players for the the college football 25 cover. There have been a lot of talk about the cover athletes and who those could be, some parameters around those. Wanted to get into some of my favorite picks and some guys that I think would definitely be great people to grace that cover. So stick with us and we will be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the 2025 draft, kind of a look ahead into who are the players that could go number one overall, who are the players that will be following very closely after them. So broke that down a little bit if you want to check that out, but let's get into the Top 10 Tuesday. And the cover athletes for college football 25 has been a huge topic of conversation the last pretty much 24 hours really, and some different news has come out around that. It seems like there are going to be multiple different cover athletes and multiple different versions. So some guys, it sounds like it's going to be 3 guys, but not exactly sure about that number quite yet. But it sounds like it's going to be multiple different cover athletes, multiple different covers, some with just one athlete, some with all 3. They will all play different positions, and they'll all be from different conferences. So, getting a little bit from everywhere, picking hopefully a defensive player in this mix. I have a couple in my list that I hope make the cut, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens here. All of the players do need to be current players, so can't add in any legends, or this would have been a much harder list to make, even though it was already incredibly hard to do in the first place. But let's get to my picks, and it's kind of an interesting group, right? I think when you start any conversation around college football 25 and cover athletes and faces of the sport, it has to start with Shedeur Sanders. And it's because of the name, it's because of the team, it's because of his dad. All of it plays a part, but this kid is as big of a name as there is in college football, probably behind his father, the biggest name in college football right now. And this feels like an obvious choice. And now there's plenty of other guys in the Big 12 that lay claim to that. One guy that's not even on this list is Ollie Gordon, who was the Doak Walker Award winner a year ago that I would love to see on the cover. But when you talk about the Big 12, when you talk about the team, the player that gets the most eyes, it's hard to beat Shedeur Sanders, so I had to start him off there. And then you have Travis Hunter, I think another guy that definitely could be a big part of this. Obviously, when you're doing different positions, it helps to have a guy that plays both sides of the ball. You get to give a little bit of love to offense and defense at the exact same time, so it doesn't necessarily hurt anything. I think, honestly, between the Big 12 teams and all of the players that are out there, there are definitely some options. You have Ollie Gordon, you have Cam Rising over at Utah, you have Avery Johnson or Dylan Edwards over at Kansas State, but at the end of the day, I feel like one of these two guys will be the representative from the Big 12, if they do have a representative, because there's no guarantee that every single conference is, there's no guarantee that every conference will be represented, but if the Big 12 is, I would expect it to be one of those two guys. Then you have James Pierce Jr., the edge rusher from Tennessee. I think this is a guy that helps you get check off the defensive position, of course, helps you check off the SEC, but also Tennessee is a huge, huge brand that I think a lot of people might downplay a little bit. Having that T logo in it, having, that yellow or that orange that they throw out there, I think it's something that will definitely make the games pop, will definitely get a lot of people trying to buy it, and will definitely help out that defensive position where you probably want someone on the defensive side of the ball on there. I think James Pierce Jr. would be my number one choice if I was to pick, to be totally honest with you. And then Quinn Ewers, I think this is a no-brainer. When you're a quarterback at Texas, it's one of the biggest positions in college football. It's one of the biggest positions in sports. It's one of the things that a lot of people, especially in the state of Texas, grow up dreaming of being, and Quinn Ewers was one of those guys. So I would not be surprised. Honestly, I'd be surprised if they haven't approached Quinn Ewers about this. I don't know if he's, accepted or if he's going to be the guy, but I think he's kind of a no-brainer, especially with someone like Arch Manning not being in the game, hyping up the starting quarterback, hyping up the guy that will be in the game for Texas at quarterback is never a bad plan from a marketing perspective. But at 5, I do have Harold Perkins. I think this is a guy, it's kind of the same thing as James Pierce Jr., where you have that LSU helmet. You have a guy that a lot of people know with Harold Perkins, who had a remarkable freshman year and plays all over the field and does a lot of incredible things. So definitely someone that would get my eyes, and definitely a game that I would buy if he was the cover athlete, because in my opinion, this is one of the best players in the country. He just was used incredibly poorly a year ago, and if he's used correctly this year, could just burst off the page, to be totally honest with you. And then I have Carson Beck. Quarterback for the best team in the country will always be on this list. There's no question about that. Georgia is the team that everyone has pegged as the best team in the country. Having that power G, being the quarterback, being a guy that everyone really knows the name of, and everyone's going into this season with a lot of high hopes for him, I think this is one that I would not be surprised at all to see him be one of the covers, cover that southeast portion of the country, and probably make some people mad around Gainesville or around Auburn, Alabama. But at the end of the day, I think this is a slam dunk pick, to be totally honest with you. And then you got Barrett Carter, the linebacker from Clemson. This one's a little bit more off the beaten path, but again, Clemson having that helmet on your game is never a bad thing. I think he's someone that is really going to jump off the page this year, is super dynamic. Kind of another guy like Abdul Carter, who absolutely could be on this list as well. But a leader of the team, someone who has been huge for Clemson in the last couple of years. And I think if you want a defensive player, if you're looking for an ACC player in particular, I think this would be a great choice. Now, you have Cam Ward, you have some other guys that absolutely could lay claim to this, but I think Barrett Carter would be a fantastic choice as one of the pieces. Luther Burden is another name I have here. You need a wide receiver. You need someone that's a little bit one of the skill players that's dynamic, and this is as good as it gets. I think this is a guy that honestly I expect to see on the cover. I feel like he's someone that just fits the bill almost perfectly. Now, it's going to be really, really hard to beat out the quarterbacks that are in the SEC, but let's say Shedeur Sanders is the shoe-in to be one of the cover athletes, which I would argue he is. Then you have to fill with likely not a quarterback from the SEC. I think Luther Burden would be a fantastic choice to do that. So I think he's someone that I would love to see on the cover. I tend to believe that he might be one of the 3. Maybe I'll give a prediction here at the end, actually. But moving on to Donovan Edwards at 9. New leader of the reigning national champion. I think this makes sense. Michigan logo, no name. Now, another guy, Will Johnson, absolutely lays claim to this as well. So I think between Michigan, I think those will be the 2 guys that they'll be kind of battling over. But I just feel like there's more people that maybe are casual college football fans that know the name Donovan Edwards, partly because of Gus Johnson's calls in some of those games. But I think he's someone that definitely could be the Big 12 or the Big 10 representative and be a great piece for that. And then you have Caleb Downs, the safety at Ohio State. I think there's a number of things that come into play here. I've said this before a number of times. In my opinion, he's the best player in the country. I think him moving from Alabama to Ohio State has made him an even bigger name in the world of college football. So that would make this give you a little bit of marketing on Twitter, whether it's people getting really mad about that or Ohio State fans absolutely loving it. So tons to kind of pull from there. I think that would be a very interesting choice. The Big Ten, it feels like, is a conference that doesn't necessarily have that guy that you can point to and say that is going to be the guy on the cover. You have Shedeur Sanders in the Big 12. In the ACC, you can point to Cam Ward. You can point to Barrett Carter. In the Big Ten, it's a little bit more sketchy. It's a little bit more confusing, but there's plenty of talented players over there. Mason Graham could absolutely be on the cover here. Drew Aller would be surprising to me, but absolutely could be one of the players that they're going after. But I left off guys like Jalen Milroe, Dylan Gabriel, Ollie Gordon, tons others that have popped in my head throughout this thing. But it's going to be a really, really tough one to figure out. Matt Brown, a reporter that has been covering this stuff wall to wall, has said one of these kind of comes out of left field for him. Not exactly sure what that means in terms of how he thinks of left field, but I do think there are a remarkable amount of great choices here. If I was to give a prediction, I'm very, very hesitant to do that, but I suppose if I was, I would probably go Shedeur Sanders as one of them, Luther Burden as one of them, the wide receiver from Missouri, and then I think I would go Caleb Downs as the safety, as the defensive player, as the Big Ten representative. That is a very, very questionable three, because I think it could go any of these different directions and I would absolutely love it. But if I was to guess, I think that's the direction that I would go. But tons of different combinations that could happen, tons of different people that could grace the cover, and I love a lot of the options, so not necessarily going to be mad any which way. This was a list that was essentially just kind of throwing 10 guys that I think would fit the bill pretty well, and then figuring out as I was making the list that there are tons of guys that absolutely lay claim to this. So it'll be interesting to see that kind of unfold and who are the guys that actually grace the cover. Possibly that comes out in May with that big release with some of the gameplay and some of the different things like that. But for right now, you can throw out all the hypotheticals you want. I've seen some West Virginia fans hype up Garrett Green as one of them, which would be very, very funny and very cool. But we'll see what happens. I think it's obviously a huge honor to be a cover athlete, and I think if they asked any one of these kids, they would immediately say yes, but we'll see what happens. We'll see who ends up gracing the cover, but you got plenty of really, really good options around college football this year. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages. We have tons of people doing incredible work covering every little bit of every sport you could possibly want. So if you need anything in the world of sports, we have you covered here over at GSMC. So tune in to any show you'd like. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.